So I think we'll get going at that. So welcome everybody again to another virtual edition of Entrepreneurs Club. I hope you're all keeping safe and well and avoiding this coronavirus. Today, if you've been to any of these meetings before, it's going to take a very similar format. Usually we'll be meeting in the old hall face to face, eating sandwiches together and not social distancing and things like that, but obviously that's well out of the window at the moment. So today we've taken our Entrepreneurs Club online again. So this is maybe the fourth or fifth session that we're doing online. Victoria and John and I got together really early on when this crisis hit, and we just sort of had a bit of a chat about, we were all getting very repeat conversations happening in our practice, and there's quite a lot of overlap between our practices. So we said, actually, it'd be a really good opportunity to put this online and do a formal Q&A with everybody. Now, throughout this last sort of couple of weeks, we've been individually sent questions by clients and on social media and all types of things like that. If you have tuned into any of our previous sessions, we should have renamed them the furlough session because we've had a lot of questions about furlough. However, the last couple of sessions, we've noticed there's been a little bit of a subtle shift towards maybe questions now about the reopening of the economy, how to bring people back into the workplace, and so on and so forth. So we'll proceed with that format today. Just a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure everybody's aware of how Zoom works by now, but just in case you're not, there are some buttons, depending on what type of device you're on, either at the bottom or the top of the screen, which will give you a few options. So the chat button, if you want to talk to each other or just sort of put general comments in there, feel free to chat away. The Q&A button is specifically if you have a question about your own business or there's a point of discussion that you've been having over the last few weeks and you'd like us to talk about it today, then just pop it on the Q&A and then it'll give us a chance to go through those and answer them towards the end. We'll try and record the session, and afterwards we'll send you an email, try and get this recording out. And also there is now a official Liverpool Entrepreneur Club group page on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to be part of that, just send me a quick email. I'll be emailing you afterwards, and we'll make sure that you sign up to that. I'm the lucky one that gets to host again today. So I will go through our questions now. Now, we've got about an hour. We're going to aim to finish this by about 4:30 as usual. Try and keep you on time. So where else to start? I'm not going to start with furlough, even though it's the top questions that I've got. I'm going to move on to sort of the return to work, be a bit more positive. So first and foremost, Victoria, if I can pose the question to you, sorry to get you there on the hop, but the question that's come in, and this is actually somebody that one of my clients that asked me this, and it was sort of what they're finding at the moment is there's a real boggle of different information on what health and safety things and what things they need to do in terms of preparing the office and preparing the staff for return to work. They're very much sort of looking imminently at bringing people back to the office on a scaled back basis. So what kind of hints and tips have you got in terms of keeping that side going?
Okay, so it's great actually to provide you with some insight on what we're doing as well. So we opened up our offices this week, only our Liverpool office, and the idea being that it became a base for people. We did it voluntary, just said to people, look, if you want to come in, we'll do the risk assessments, we'll make it safe, but if there is, it gave us the ability to bring in some of our new starters because we were having a challenge trying to get them inducted virtually was really difficult for us given the nature of what we do. And everybody within our business sort of put their hands up and said, yeah, I would really love the opportunity for just one day a week, even just to be able to go into the office. So what we've done is we ran a thorough risk assessment before, and you have to do that. You have to follow the sort of the template for a risk assessment. It's specific to COVID. It's important if you are in a shared building that you also get the risk assessment from your landlord. So that was something that we asked for. Our landlord wasn't that forthcoming at first and hadn't done a great job, so we forced their hand really to say, well, we need this, we are liable for our staff, so we need this information. When you've completed the risk assessment will ask you various things about social distancing. For example, ask you about the need maybe for PPE equipment, and you'll fill it out and identify the risk. That information then needs to be put on your website. It needs to be visible for all of your staff, but also needs to be visible to your clients. So that's an important thing to note as well, that it does go up and it's very open and transparent. We did things, say for example, from a social perspective, like we removed, not necessarily removed the desk, but we've put sort of notices on certain desks that can't be used at the moment. So we've got some of them are blocked off so that people work diagonally rather than working sort of to one another or opposite. Obviously, sort of lots of signage, lots of hand sanitizer, cleaning equipment as you would expect. PPE equipment for the communal areas as well, and for what we do, and I'm sure lots of people are on the call as well. If you're going out to clients, we have clients, in construction that have gone back and they require us to go on site now. So again, we just need to make sure that we provide that PPE equipment to our team for when they're going out on site. And then it's interesting really. My advice would definitely be, because I was quite heavily involved in our risk assessment, is for you to physically go into your offices and think about various scenarios. So, like we had to remove nobody was allowed to use the boardroom facilities. So it's a little bit odd because you could actually be in the office and you'll still be on a Zoom, but sort of in various offices and together, but you can't sit sort of near each other. We've got to have that 2 meter distance. We took away sort of tea and coffee. You can't make each other tea and coffee. You've got to bring in your own. You bring in your own water, bring in your own food. You're responsible for yourself, which quite a lot of the team quite enjoy actually, because no one has to do any tea and coffee rounds anymore. And then the other thing that we've done is obviously sort of a rotation. So, and this will very much depend on your building and your setup. We can only have 5 people in the office at any one time. It's the only way that we can physically sort of manage the 2 meter rule. And also we had to consider the sort of kitchen facilities. It would have been impossible to only allow, because we're only allowing 1 person in the kitchen at any one time. So there's quite a lot to consider really within the practicalities. You also need to do an induction, so you need to re-induct your staff when they go back into your offices or wherever it is that you work, and ensure that they are really comfortable, because that's a big concern of mine. I think if people aren't educated and understand what they need to do, because the message by the government, is a little bit confusing. I would hate for sort of employees to breach the sort of health and safety rules without them realising that they had done. So that's very important. And also sort of like a declaration form for them to complete, because again, you've got to assure that they've got no symptoms right now, that they're not in one of the sort of risk categories. And sometimes what I found with clients is they make the assumption that they're not in a risk category, but they don't necessarily know. They don't know who they live with. They don't know if they've got an underlying condition that maybe they've never declared before. So this sort of like document and declaration form will cover those areas so that you are aware of any risks that you maybe didn't know before. But I do have a 20-step process that if they're not a client on the call now, I'm more than happy to share with people just to help them, just to give them that guidance on what they need to do to be able to get themselves back into work.
Well, that maybe actually points to a question that Sean's just asked, which is where would we find the risk assessment and guidelines? Do you know if that's what you're referring to there, if there's an official set that we should be abiding to?
Yeah, there is. Sean, I think you've actually sorry, Sean. I thought it was the other Sean. I was going to say, Sean, I think you've got it already, but it's Sean O'Neill. Yeah, there is guidance on, so the government, you have got it sort of on their website, the HMRC, it is there. But I can send you this 20-page step and it does refer to it for you. So I'll send it across and hopefully that'll be able to help you.
Great. I was just typing that, so I'll come back to that in a second. And just to buy me a bit of time while I'm doing that. Jon, if I can switch over to you at this point. So question that we've had come in here, what support will there be beyond May for the self-employed?
Okay. that is one for me, I guess. Yeah, so the self-employed have had a scheme called the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, which provided a grant to the self-employed. I think there was a bit of confusion at first over the definition of self-employed, in that term gets used in a lot of areas, and whether it's applying for a mortgage or other things. But for the purposes of the grant, the self-employed are people who fill in the self-employed section of a personal tax return each year. So it doesn't include limited company directors, as an example. To date, there was a grant payable in kind of May, which covered 3 months of profits, based on, and basically the calculation was they took the last 3 tax returns for the year ended 5th April 17, 5th April 18 and 5th April 19, worked out an average monthly profit during that period. If you hadn't worked the whole period, they just prorated it and paid over 80% of the monthly profit for 3 months. So to make it simple for me, if your average monthly profit was £1,000, you got £800 times 3, £2,400. The maximum grant was £7,500 in total, and you claimed that last month. Basically, was there in May. It was extended about 2 weeks ago now, when the Chancellor announced the extension of the furlough scheme. At the same time, basically extended this scheme as well. It's now been extended for another 3 months. So they will now use exactly the same calculation to work out the monthly profits, and they're going to cover basically June, July and August, payable in August, but the percentage will actually drop to 70%. So in my example, if your average monthly profits were £1,000, you'll get £700 times 3, which is £2,100. Now that's payable in one lump sum in August. For anybody who hasn't claimed the last one yet, because you do actually have to go on and claim it, because basically they don't have your bank details otherwise, you've got until the 13th of July to do so. The specifics over the claim for next time are actually being published this Friday, actually the 12th of June. But it's a reasonable assumption it'll be exactly the same as last time, where to an extent you went on, logged on, provided bank details, ticked, you self-declared that you had been impacted by COVID-19. The size of the impact was irrelevant, just you've been impacted, and based on that you got the money within, it's about 6 working days. It's actually pretty quick. So that's kind of where we are. What they're not doing, which I've been asked a few times actually, I don't know if it's popped in the questions today, but I've actually been asked a few times, is they're not extending it basically to anyone who didn't get one last time. So one of the problems with the last one for some people was, unless you've done a tax return for the 5th of April 19 or before, you're not eligible, which means if you set up your business on the 6th of April 2019, which is a year ago now, you couldn't get anything. That's still the same for this one. It can be exactly the same people, just they can get another grant. If you didn't apply for a grant last time, you can actually apply for this one, because you did have to self-certify that you were impacted by COVID. So if for whatever reason you weren't at that point, but you are now, you can get the second grant. So overall, it's quite a generous scheme. So for the course of 6 months, they're paying on average 75% of the monthly profits out. Obviously, it's not quite as much as the 80% furlough staff, but in the grand scheme of things, it is quite a decent grant, and obviously well worth getting.
So we've actually had a couple of bolt-on questions then. I was thinking to myself when you were answering that there. As far as the discretionary grant goes, what does eligibility look like? So what type of businesses are eligible, and what kind of reasons might you have missed out on the first one? How do you know if you qualify for the next one? Is there any kind of guidance you can give on that?
Yeah, so they're separate grants actually. So the self-employment grants was, sorry, that one.
Yeah.
The discretionary grant is a different grant.
Oh, right, sorry.
As an entirely different grant actually, which I'm happy to talk about now or later, Alex, if you want me to keep
it. Question, John, just on the self-employed. Is it still the same in terms of they can still work? So obviously with furlough, you were unable to work while employed, you could still work and take the money?
Yes, and that was a big difference between furlough or furlough to date, because furlough has been all or nothing, i.e. you can't work at all, whereas the self-employed, you could be working and just had to be impacted, and the size of the impact was immaterial. So if you'd lost one sale for a tenner, you could quite, honestly tick the box, you'd be impacted. So that was actually a big disparity between the two schemes to date, and it, for the self-employed, it continues exactly the same, whereas obviously furloughs, I'm sure will crop up during the call, it is now introducing the part-time furlough.
That's interesting. I didn't know the difference between the two, to be honest. When I'm reading the questions here and I saw grants, I just thought that was the same thing. So two completely separate things.
Yeah, the discretionary grant's totally different, and perhaps we'll come back to that so I don't hog the first half hour, which I would do if I went on to that one as well.
Okay, well, I'll take a question that I've been sent actually. So let me just have a read here. So the market seems to have come back quite strongly in the US. Why is the UK market lagging behind? I assume the person there is talking around general sort of indexes. There could be a number of reasons, really. I mean, sterling as a whole hasn't been doing great over the past few months. That's definitely held us back. I think also if you actually were to look at the major indexes, so let's say take the FTSE 100 and then take the Dow, or even more extreme, the NASDAQ over in the US. And for those that aren't aware, essentially the US stock market content is much more tech laden than ours is. So if you were to look at our FTSE 100, it's heavily, well, it was airline stocks, but it's been quite controversial this last couple of weeks because there's a couple of airlines dropped out due to what's been going on. But it's usually heavily sort of banks, energy stocks, that type of thing, of which they haven't been doing too well, they haven't been too great. And then obviously the sterling effects have compounded that effect. But over in the US, you have the world-renowned FANG stocks over there. So, your Facebooks, Amazon, Alphabet, Netflix, Google, and then obviously Microsoft as well. I saw a ridiculous couple of stats the last couple of weeks about Microsoft, for one, where Microsoft now, if you were to take their market cap size, you could hold that pretty much in line with the FTSE 100, and that one company has the same market cap as our whole top 100 companies in the UK at the moment. And the other one being that Zoom, the very software that we're using. I mean, I didn't know really that much about Zoom when it was February this year, but there was a great graphic presented the other day, which is now Zoom is more valuable, technically valuable, than the nine largest airlines over in the US combined. So it just shows you perhaps the defensive call has been to move into tech, move into streaming services, and you've seen the capital value rise over in the US. Whereas in the UK, we've got more of a maybe long-standing traditional market impacted by sterling, which is perhaps suppressed it for a little bit longer. That would be my take on it. Now, quite interesting, the last couple of weeks has been people looking at the horizon, looking forward at what comes next, and this sort of idea that perhaps our marketplace will move towards maybe a greener economy, or maybe moving towards more healthcare with AstraZeneca and everything going on with vaccines at the moment. It could be quite an exciting change for the UK market, but it does depend largely on how quickly we can pivot, how quickly we can take advantage of any government finance that's in place and try and drive that sector forward, because ultimately that's what happens a lot over in the US. Ultimately a number of different reasons, but I mean, for example, the US NASDAQ is heavily tech laden, and I think they're actually showing a positive for this year now. So they've come straight back through a 30-40% loss, and they're back into positive again, which is staggering. I saw that they moved up yesterday, moved on again today. So if we now move to the ever popular conversation, furlough, we've all been waiting for it, so we might as well crack on with it. For those that have joined for the first time, it's a bit of a running joke, because essentially we've had about 700 questions on furlough and about 4 questions on other things over the past 5 weeks. So Right, so quite an interesting one here, a bit of a different tact. Somebody's asked a question, can I continue to furlough my staff if my business does not pick back up? So what's your thoughts, guys?
Well, I've unmuted myself already as soon as you said furlough, Alex. Yeah, today actually has worked out a really good day for this to be on, because just to remind people that if you haven't furloughed anyone, you need to furlough them by today, because ultimately the current scheme will close at the end of this month. So if you have, and then we've got this new introduction of the furlough scheme, but the flexible furlough, so what Jon alluded to before, and it will close it'll close in October completely. But what the government has said is that if you haven't got somebody furloughed by the end of this month, then they will not be allowed to go onto the flexible furlough scheme. Now, I think that has caused some confusion, and clients that are on the call now of mine will note that we sent something out this week just to remind people in sort of big bold letters that they must, because you have to have been furloughed for 3 weeks, you need to work backwards from the end of this month. So the date is today. So if you haven't furloughed anybody and you do intend to, then I really would urge you to get that done, because otherwise you cannot now bring anybody, you can't sort of bring somebody into furlough at a later date that hasn't already been furloughed.
Because that is actually a follow-up question that we have, which is, and I think you've answered it there, is do my staff need to be furloughed on the 30th of June to be furloughed part-time afterwards? So you're essentially saying yes, but it needs to happen today.
Yeah.
And the deadline is today, so people could still furlough today and it's still come into effect.
Yeah, as long as they can demonstrate that they have furloughed that person for 3 weeks. So it's got to be done by today. So anybody that you want to be able to take advantage of that furlough scheme, then I really would urge you to do it now. You can't do it at a later date.
Okay.
Victoria, actually, sorry, because actually I know where that little add-on question came from, and actually I'll perhaps just repeat it, actually, because it was a slight tweak on it. Actually, was we were asked by somebody, the question was actually, do they have to be furloughed actually on the 30th of June? If you see what I mean, i.e.
So not from now to the 30th.
Could they have been furloughed previously, be back on the 30th of June? Can they be re-furloughed later? Was actually the question.
Sorry, Jon, I lost you then completely.
Sorry, because I know the person who asked the question, I know actually what they're asking, and it was a discussion we had. The follow-on question was actually, does somebody have to actually be furloughed on the 30th of June itself, on that very date, to ever be furloughed again? I.e., could they have been furloughed previously, come back and go off later?
Right, I see. So they need to be furloughed on, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Jon, but my understanding is that they need to be furloughed on the 30th of June, which is why we're sort of saying to people that they have to have done it by now. So it's more to, I suppose, what the government are trying to do now is they're trying to obviously ease the lockdown and encourage people to get back into work, and slowly but surely trying to ease us off furlough. So I think the argument by the government is that if people aren't furloughed at that point in time, then they don't really need to be furloughed after that now. So again, you know, if you have had somebody on, I know we've advised on previous sessions about alternating every 3 weeks.
That's why the client was my client was chatting to me yesterday about it, and I thought I dropped it in today. Who have rotated slightly because it's slightly project based what they do.
There's been a follow-up question actually from Paula. Thanks, Paula. So it says here, if you bring back a member of staff part-time in July, can you then put them back on furlough later month, or do they have to stay part-time / work furlough?
Right. Okay, so this links to the new flexible furlough. So So Paula, what you can do is you can do both from July, which is something that we have banged the drum about throughout. It should have always been the case, really, to give that flexibility. So what you can do from July is you can actually bring somebody back part-time. The days that they work part-time, so say for example they work for you 2 days, you bring them back, then you pay them at the full rate for those 2 days. And if they say do 5 days a week, then the remaining 3 days you will pay them, they would be furloughed. And you know, if that's at 80% or 100%, depending on how you pay currently, then that would be what your claim would be. So it does, so you won't have to sort of keep rotating or bring them back and furloughing and not furloughing. You can keep them on furlough, but you can bring them back to your business as well. So it is a really good positive move, and something that long awaited, really.
Interesting. Okay. If we can just temporarily, I know we're all sort of het up by furlough here, so we can just temporarily move off it, that'd be good. Come back to it, I promise.
No, Alex.
I know. There's a general gasp of the room. We've got it. All right, well, an interesting question here. John and I were discussing this just before we actually went live today. So the question was more of a statement, really, and it was a client whose accountant has gone missing over the past 10 weeks, not literally, but they've been engaged with other clients and they've struggled to get hold of their accountant. How hard is it to transfer accountants at the moment, John?
Well, funny, I had to check with Alex. It wasn't my client. It should be the same as normal. And again, I probably don't want to. It's a valid question, but one I don't want to spend too much time on this call for, because it's not about coronavirus and what have you. But to an extent, it's the same as usual in that it's if somebody is moving accountant, it's an admin process. It shouldn't be too difficult other than a bit of admin. The two accountants liaise to get all information across and what have you. I think, what I would say is at least try and have a chat with the accountant and just see what's going on, whether there's something kind of temporary that has got in the way of the service, or something you can rectify first before moving. But if somebody is to move, yes, it's a case of find another accountant and start that process. And it's a bit like changing banks, where the banks talk to each other and transfer the direct debit. Same with accountants ethically by our institutes will talk to each other, move the information across, and there'll just be a bit of admin for the client to kind of sign engagement, provide ID and what have you.
And I should point out, it wasn't me or one of John's clients that said that, so that's good.
If it was, I'd say it's very hard to move.
Yeah, almost impossible. Gavin's asked a question here live. What extra concerns and liabilities with your staff should company owners, directors be aware of? So mainly, should you keep a record of your staff's understanding of your back to work policy and new workplace guidelines? And how often should you review their understanding of these guidelines? So ongoing record keeping, what's your thoughts on that, Victor?
Okay, well, I'd recommend, Gavin, that you absolutely make sure that you get either a signature or, an email sort of confirmation from your team to say that I've looked at the risk assessment and they've also read the sort of guidance. So I sent out the risk assessment to all of my team. I also then produced like a new induction pack, and the induction, it said sort of like what they needed to be aware of, what sort of changes we had, and they had to sign that at the end. Now I understand, given us working remotely, for them to just email back to say, yeah, I've loaded on HR and I'll keep those records. And I think from your perspective, and I understand as an employer as well, it's that nervousness of sort of if anybody got 100%, I think in the most important thing for all of us with our staff, want to look after them. So I would also suggest that obviously you're going to re-induct everyone, so not just new starters, with these changes to health and safety. there will be changes, and things will change over time as well. You know, there's already talks of sort of maybe changing the social distancing rules from 2 meters to 1. So my advice would probably be, as those changes happen with the government, that will give you the opportunity to just reinduct, as it were, and just get that assurance that your staff understand. And a couple of people have asked me this question quite a few times in terms of, what do you do if people don't take the rules, as they were, sort of seriously? So ultimately, it's very important to make sure that you look in the mirror and think, you know, I've done everything I possibly can to induct and sort of educate the team so they know what we're doing. But if somebody does continue to you know, breach those health and safety procedures, then you know, you will have to invoke your disciplinary process. And again, that's something that I've had to remind my team of, that these rules are here to protect them, and it's very important that people don't, as we've seen in the parks of what people have done so far, some people are not taking this as seriously as others.
Yep, I'd completely agree with that. I think, hope that answers that. Moving on slightly to different tacts, so move on to bounce back loans, which have been really popular. So John, if I can ask you, there's a couple of questions here almost linked together. So it says here that, well, it's actually diametrically opposed. It says, I have a bounce back loan but now need more. Can I get CBILS? But then also linked to that, somebody has got bounce back. They don't need the cash right now, but should I borrow more against bounce back just in case? So it's kind of, what can someone do if they've got bounce back as far as extra lending, and what would you be recommending in terms of taking the maximum out?
Well, I guess with the bounce back loan, the maximum you can borrow is £50,000 or 25% of turnover. Is the smaller of the two. So if your annual turnover is £100,000, the motion has £25,000, and up to, if you've got a turnover of £200,000 or more, you can have 50,000. CBILS start at 50,000 and £1 and upwards. So in terms of the bounce back loans, I mean, the scheme is currently open to the 4th of November. So if somebody hasn't borrowed yet and is thinking, oh, do I need it or not, they don't have to make a decision yet. You've got until 4th of November, so it's, you know, an amount of time to pause and think about it. If you've already got a bounce back loan, and this actually works the other way as well, actually, if you'd already got a CBILS loan before bounce back had been announced, you could transfer it from a CBILS to a bounce back as long as it was kind of below 50,000. If you have a bounce back loan and you want to borrow more, you can get a CBILS loan, but you would have to use part of that to pay back the bounce back, because once you've finished with the arrangement, you can't have both. You can have one or the other. So yes, if you borrowed £50,000 on a bounce back and realise, oh, actually I needed £100,000, you could apply for a CBILS loan of 100,000 and repay the bounce back you already had. At the end, let's say at the end of the process, you can only have one or the other. Now actually, Funding Circle actually kind of making a bit of a thing of that at the moment about now they've got CBILS loans, about actually doing that, and potentially if you want a bit more, is therefore borrow that, pay back the bounce back, and just move on to CBILS with a larger amount.
So just thinking aloud here, so say somebody applied for bounce back, we know that they could get maybe £20,000 or something like that, but they decide to only take 10 or 11 because that's all they feel that they need. Would you be saying actually you should be sort of taking the 20 because you've got 12 months without paying any interest and then decide what you need and pay back the difference? Or would it be better to take the 11 and then maybe extend in future if you can do that?
It is a common thing of quite a lot of people I know, either as clients or more widely, have taken the bounce back loan whether they need it or not, because there's no interest and no charges for a year, and to an extent that's taking it almost as a buffer, and putting it to one side, and if they do need to, you know, and if it turns out they don't need it, repaying it next year. At the moment, I don't think any of the banks right now, but I mean, additional lenders are being added, and simply the banks are updating as they go. At the moment, I'm not aware that if you borrow half the amount of your bounce back loan, you can go back and ask for a bit more, I would assume you will be allowed to at some point before the 4th of November. I think to an extent with the banks, it's been so overwhelmed with these applications for CBILS and bounce back loans, they've had to keep it quite simple. One of the issues actually is, and talked to someone yesterday who banks with a bank that doesn't yet offer the bounce back loan, and therefore kind of go somewhere else. And at the moment, again, Funding Circle are waiting for accreditation, but at the moment, the only lender who offers a bounce back loan to non-customers is HSBC, but they've got a huge waiting list at the moment. So, you know, you are kind of way back there in terms of getting it, because all of the banks are basically overwhelmed with applications to their own customers.
Okay, thank you. If I go on to a question that I was asked this week, and I thought it'd be useful to derive the differences. So there is a term within investing. So if you are managing pension funds, or you've got staff that have got pension funds, quite understandably over the past 8 or 9 weeks, there's been quite a lot of uncertainty, a lot of emotions around that sort of thing. And the questions that I'm getting quite a lot are, it's sort of around the type of funds available, so very much in that product layer of the ecosystem. One of the questions that came in was, I've been told by my pension that I'm in a passively managed fund. I've got no idea what this means. What is this, and what is the alternative? So just really simply, a passively managed fund is usually some form of a tracker. So what it will do is it will try and aim to replicate the performance of a particular index or indices. So it could be, you know, a FTSE tracker, it could be an MSCI tracker, it could be a number of different things. Ultimately, what it will do though is it will try and expose the investor within a certain sort of parameter to whatever those returns have been. Now, perhaps why I've had a number of these questions over the past 8 to 9 weeks is, with markets being so volatile, it's created quite a lot of uncertainty around in people's minds when they're in a tracker, because the market obviously takes quite a significant tumble, then might go through a period of recovery, and that wave of emotion, the client is really closely tied to it. So whatever it does, your fund will probably do very similar. The other alternative is moving towards more of an actively managed fund, and an actively managed fund is there's actual stock picking going on, and there might be bond picking going on. So a diversified portfolio, not really driven to the same tailored performance of a particular index. And with that type of thing, why that question came up, it's from a conversation I had earlier this week, was it's managing the downside really. So I think that whenever a market blip or a trough or a period of volatility comes along, if you're in an actively managed fund, in theory, as long as it's mashed up in a number of different ways to what you feel is appropriate, your fund manager has got more scope to manage the downside. So to pick defensive stocks, for example, to move more money to cash, because they don't have to be within a certain certain bandwidth of an index anymore. So it can offer reassurance, but saying that as well, there are some very good trackers out there. Ultimately, deciding on what's right for you, or ultimately your staff, because I know there's a lot of business owners on here. Information and data in this period are very important, but more the translation of that information and data is what's more important. So getting someone to speak to staff, getting someone to talk to individuals about their funds is really important. Moving back up now towards furlough, if we can spend a couple of minutes on furlough. So there's one here which is saying, my business is okay now, but will have a drop in a couple of months as the customers drop away. How do I furlough staff? So who wants to take that one, guys?
You want to go for Vic, or shall I start? I think you're muted anyway, so I will start. So they're okay now, but want to furlough later, I think was the question. I think the issue with that will be that this 30th of June deadline. So if somebody hasn't been furloughed before the 30th of June, you can't furlough them later. The flexible furloughing is really good, is really positive, allowing kind of part-time furloughing in the future. But I guess one of the things it doesn't pick up are businesses where the drop-off in their work is not immediate. So they might be, I don't know, doing project work or something, and projects are now coming to an end, and then there's no future work. So unfortunately, unless a staff member has been furloughed for 3 weeks before the 30th of June, they can't be furloughed later. It is kind of a black or white. The other thing actually linked to that as well is that from the 1st of July onwards, the maximum amount of people you can have furloughed in any given pay period is capped at the most you claimed for in any period before the 30th of June as well. So it does come with two angles, because they're trying to get people back to work, and there will be some businesses, because of the nature of the business, it unfortunately doesn't help if that drop-off wasn't immediate and the drop-off comes in, July, August, as say projects work or something like that.
Fair enough. And the question that we've had live, anonymously live, is should accountants be charging an extra fee for processing a furlough claim?
It depends. I'm a fun type of guy and spend some time in groups of accountants, kind of online, in terms of kind of WhatsApp and Facebook groups with accountants all around the country. It's probably split 50-50 over those who are charging and those aren't. We haven't charged anything to anyone yet. I took a view, certainly for the first month, and has been two months this, I felt we wanted to support the clients right now. Having said that, in month one, in terms of hours spent, we had 2 people on it, and between them it was 40 odd hours. They spent processing furlough claims for no fee. So some of my peers think therefore I was stupid to do so, because it was 40 odd hours for nothing. So there isn't actually a right or a wrong answer. I think what I did actually, we had about 200 clients. We process 130 payrolls. They're about 2/3 of them have a payroll, I'm going to say. I think we had one complaint about the furlough, and it was simply that, why haven't you processed mine yet? And we have to prioritise to an extent, and some of our clients have furloughed. I think the most has furloughed about 70 staff. This was somebody who's furloughed 1. We just had to say, look, we've got to try and do it in a certain order. So I sent an email to all of our clients to say, and I'm trying to think of the wording I used, it was along the lines I said, we're not asking for a fee, we're asking for patience and understanding, I think was what I put. Just saying, look, we're trying to help here. I'm not asking you to pay us, but just please understand it's actually taking quite a lot of time, and just therefore to be patient as you work your way through them. But I said there's not a right or a wrong answer on whether an accountant should or shouldn't charge, because it is an additional service. It just comes down to you and your relation with your accountant.
Fair enough. There's a couple of linked questions here, and I feel like we've already touched on these or even answered them, which is what financial support is there going forwards for my staff, and if I take on new staff, can I furlough them at a later date? So as far as taking on new staff, furlough them at a later date, I don't know the answer to that one. So what would be the answer there if this all happens beyond today and we take new people on?
It's the same rules that have always applied. So if they were not on the payroll before, oh gosh, the date has left my brain. It was only the 8th of February, and if you recall our earlier conversations, the government had a bit of backlash from that, so they actually moved it to the 19th of March, which was good because it allowed for some more people that were then on the payroll to be covered by furlough. But if it'll still apply, it's like what John said before around the self-employed perspective. If they've not been on the payroll from that date, they will not be able to claim furlough. And there's been, particularly in my governing body, the CIPD, there's been uproar in that regard, because there have been so many people that fell between the two. So we're sort of brought into a business, new recruit, furloughed by their new business, actually they can't be furloughed by them, but there isn't any work for them, and then their previous employer, because the government said that you could add them, you could backdate it and add them to the furlough, it was down to the employer whether they wanted to, and a lot of employers, ex-employers didn't want to, whether there was sort of bad because they'd left the business or whatever. So these people who had no choice but to go onto universal credit.
Wow. Okay. The last question I think we've got here on that before we end the furlough conversation is I've heard as well, I was interested in this, about there's some changes going on in terms of contributions and what businesses are expected to spend on this in the next few months, a greater shouldering from them. So the question is, what are the changes going to be, and when will the scheme end?
Shall I pick that one up, Vic?
Yeah, go for
it. My little remind myself. So basically, yes, employers will be expected to contribute going forward. So at the moment, we're in June. The scheme, as it is to an extent, ends on the 30th of June, and from the 1st of July, there will be an opportunity to part-time furlough. During July, though, the contribution from the government will remain the same, as in it will be 80% of an employee's wages while furloughed, with a cap of £2,500 per employee. During July, the government will continue to pay the employer's national insurance and the employer's statutory pension contributions for the furloughed staff. From the 1st of August, the government will continue to pay the 80%, but employers will have to pay those national insurance contributions and pension contributions. From the 1st of September, the government will reduce its contribution to 70%. So an employer will have to pay basically 10% plus employers' NI and contributions. In October, the government reduced it to 60%, therefore the employer pays 20% plus employers' NI and employers' pension contributions. So basically from the 1st of August, the government's kind of scaling back its contribution a little bit each month. And then in October, it gets down to that kind of the minimum contribution, where the government's putting 60% in, employer 10% plus the employers' NI and pension. And then on the 31st of October, the scheme ends. So it's just that kind of stepping it up. And I guess what that will do, and I mean, just where Victoria will come in terms of the practicalities, it will start to lead business owners to have to make a decision really over, is there a job at the end of this for the staff? Because I guess it's one thing at the moment, it's probably been relatively easy to say, well, actually, rather than make that hard decision, I'll furlough the staff because it's not costing me a penny. As the cost starts to come back onto an employer, even if it's only 20%, if you are, for example, particularly like in hospitality, travel, and what have you, who either will be operating at a part capacity because of social distancing, or travel's not really happening, even 20% might be too much if you've got nothing coming in. So it will start to people actually have to look at the future and what's happening there.
That's interesting, John, because I know you and I had said quite early on, hadn't we? Our prediction was that this would be maybe sector specific. So I was quite surprised when this came out that there's been nothing considered for hospitality.
Yeah, me too.
The last to go back, aren't they? And as you say, I'm talking to clients in that sector now who are saying, I can't afford those, even if they open in July, but they've got these social distancing rules, they're not going to be at the full capacity they once were. So there will be, again, my governing body predictions are significant redundancies from sort of July onwards.
I think because also we see the figures, and if you've only got half the tables open, or one of the travel as well, which is just going to take longer to get going again, because some people will travel, but some people won't want to because of the risks. Some will think, well, actually, how much fun do I have when I get there if I've got a rota for when I'm allowed to go to the pool or something? And yes, I thought there might be something for those industries to keep it going, but probably can't afford to keep the staff on even at 20%.
Yeah.
So we've probably got time for another couple of questions. So I'll field one and then we'll have one more. So a couple of questions that I've had the last couple of days have been similar kind of thing, which is really about sort of pensions again, or savings and investments, or however you want to look at it. It can be looked at differently. Same outcome though. So I'm due to retire this year. Should I be postponing my retirement? What should I do with my funds? And then also somebody else asked, financially, I've got no idea if I'm saving enough each month. Quite a common thing that. And how do I go about figuring this out? Is there a formula? So really simply, no, there is no formula as such, because it really depends on what your plans are, which is why the two are completely linked. So what I find that when we first start speaking to clients or potential clients is there's 3 P's to a good financial practice. There is the product, there is the process, and there is the plan. But what we find is that a lot of people live in the sphere of product. So they get their product statements, they might check their funds, they watch the values go up and down, but ultimately you kind of make all your decisions at that level. Now, what I would say is that when we start working with people, we put a process in place of ongoing regular reviews and analysis and data management. But then we ultimately find out what someone's plan is. Now, if you've got the 3 Ps and you've got all of them sort of robust, and you've figured out what your plan is and how long you'd like to work for and what you'd like your retirement to look for, these are all conversations that you should be having now, regardless of what's going on in that product level. Your product really should be just inherently linked to the others. So once you've got the water all flowing the right way and everything pulling in the right direction, it can be a really powerful force for good. Unfortunately, like I say, what happens is sometimes we're making decisions at a product level which might not be aligned to our plan and actually can end up hurting our plan. So to those couple of people, we've got some really good software. There's some really good software out there actually that professionals use to model this type of thing. And I just say have conversations with people, get a few names, have conversations with people about modeling what you want your future to look like. Pretty simple once you've done that. The last question, what I'll do is I'll focus on some positives before we end. So that'd be quite nice. Which is all about return to work. So a couple of things here. So I think we might have touched on this at a session before, but how do we regulate holiday requests so that everyone is not off at the same time? And what is the position if staff go abroad and are required to self-quarantine for 14 days? So that's more around that kind of return to work piece. And also, somebody's got a staff member who's just gone on sick and due to return to work in the next couple of weeks. What procedures do they need to follow? Is it the same, essentially, or has that changed massively because of this?
Okay. In relation to the leave, then what we've sort of been advising people to do is to encourage really their staff to take some leave during this period of time. So we got clarity on that not so long ago around furlough. So if your member of staff is furloughed, they can still take leave. So you don't have to wait until the end of the furloughed leave for them to take a load of accrued annual leave as well. The only thing to bear in mind is if they are furloughed and they take annual leave, if you're paying them at the 80%, you need to top that up to 100% for those days. So arguably, say if they take 2 days, you'd have to top up for that period of time. For any leave that you ask them to take, you have to give them double the notice. So if you ask them to take 1 day's leave, you'd have to give them 2 days notice that they are to take that leave. Then from and again, we did this in my business, we had a look at sort of people had accrued quite a bit of leave because they would have taken holidays, so lots of people had, bless them, sort of cancelled holidays and plans, and our office manager had a 30th plan and a fantastic trip that didn't happen. So they cancelled all that leave, but we were fearful that by the time we came out of this, we would have a lot of leave left. And given the nature of our business, we really couldn't afford to have everyone off at the same time because we need to deliver that helpline, that support. So we just spoke to the teams, and asked them if they would take some leave during the lockdown period, which was interesting, really. So they'd just take like one day here, 1 day there, but it was welcomed as well, I think, from people because they've been working at home for so long, and given some of the challenges that they may have from a childcare perspective, trying to juggle the two, it actually was very well received. So I would urge people to have a look at sort of any leave that is left and make sure that they deal with that. The quarantine situation's an interesting one, Alex, and it's probably something that I'll be able to talk more about over the next couple of weeks when we've got a bit more detail. I know obviously there is that introduction that there'll be a 14-day quarantine, and we have had people ask the question, and arguably then what you've got to consider is the 2-week holiday plus the 2-week quarantine when they return. That could change, you know, and that's what we've been saying to clients at the moment, particularly with this sort of test and trace. That may change because there has been an uproar about the introduction of that so late on. So I'll probably maybe hold that one and talk to you a bit later on about that, Alex, when I've got a bit more clarity. And then your final question, sorry, Alex, what was that about absence?
Yeah, so I've lost it now. I've clicked off it. Hang on a minute. So the question was, here we go. Holiday requests. I've got a staff member who's gone on sick and we're due to return to work in the next couple of weeks. What procedures do I need to follow? Is it, I'd assume it's the same as what it has always been, isn't it?
The same, yeah. I mean, I suppose it's difficult to answer without further detail. And if somebody's on the call now, more than welcome for them to reach out to me and I'll give them some guidance off the call. If it's COVID related, then yeah, you know, we have had to update some of our policies in that regard, so it may be slightly different. But if not, it's just as it would always be. You know, you need to adhere to your absence policy. You need to be consistent in your approach, and the way in which you treat this person needs to be the way in which you would treat anyone else within the business. But yeah, happy to talk to that individual separately offline.
Okay, well, that kind of brings us nicely to 4:30. Now we've got a couple of questions which are waiting, and I appreciate we're running over if we go into those now. So what I'll do is I'll send an email to everybody that's attended. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll try and cover those off and get the panel's feedback for you beyond this. We'll also send out a recording of this time. So last time, my apologies, I messed up the recording last time. Technology is not my friend all the time, and so we'll get the recording out to you. We'll also create a few links on social media, so feel free to follow us on the Liverpool Entrepreneurs Club. You can find that on LinkedIn, and we'll also send sort of the next dates for the next session as things are still rapidly evolving as we go along. But that's it for today, everybody. Thank you very much for attending, and look forward to seeing you all soon at some point, maybe face to face, who knows. So thanks very much.